to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics and the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and I'm joined again today, welcoming back Chris Micheli, founding partner of the advocacy firm of Preya and Micheli in Sacramento. How's it going, Chris? Thanks for coming back.
I'm well. Thanks for having me back. It was fun the first time.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. You know, it's funny. I feel like I got a lot of good feedback when you were on last time.
Oh, good. Okay.
A lot of people listened. So,
all right.
You've got some
hopefully your constituents.
Yeah, well, them too. Yeah, for sure. But you've got some followers. For sure.
Okay.
So how are you doing? How's life since session ended? We ended session mid-September now. So how things going?
Close to midnight on Thursday the 14th.
Yeah.
Well, it's always, I think, for most lobbyists, still busy, not to the same degree during the 30-day period because we're not at the Capitol all day for meetings or hearings, but there's still a fair amount going on with the governor's office. And of course, clients are asking your expectation, and some are already preparing for the 2024 session. But now I feel after the governor's final actions, like we can actually put 2023 session to rest. Now we can start looking forward to the 2024 session, which is right around the corner, unfortunately. Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Comes
quickly.
The governor had until last Saturday to sign and veto bills.
Yeah. He didn't take the full time, though.
He didn't, right? Did he finish Friday or Thursday?
He finished Friday, which is the second time in 3 years that he has finished a day early, which, as far as I know, it's totally unprecedented. I don't remember.
Interesting.
Jerry Brown 2.0. I obviously wasn't here for the first go around. Schwarzenegger, Davis, Wilson. Yeah. I don't remember them finishing a day early. In fact, I remember some nights, Governor Brown, his office was issuing the last press release at 11:30. Yeah, there were a few that were right up to. Crazy. Obviously they finish well before the press release goes out,
of course,
because there's a lot that goes into it. But I just mean the press release was coming out within the last hour. So
no, that's. It's maybe you wanted to get out of town. It's like
well, as I publicly said, at least by way of X, although I have a hard time not saying Twitter.
I still say
because I don't. What do you do? I mean, tweet is the action verb.
Yeah,
what is it? I X. I X'd a post.
I post.
I don't know. Anyways,
no fun.
But I said congratulations to Christy Balma, his ledge secretary, and of course all of her deputies. I think do just a bang up job, and obviously to be able. I mean, look, the governor spent the first few days of the signing period in New York for Climate Week.
Oh, that's right.
He obviously spent a few days dealing with the replacement for Senator Feinstein.
Right.
And then had to deal with over 1,000 bills and. To manage all of that and get all of the EBRs, the enrolled bill reports together for him. I think that's a tremendous amount of work.
And a day early to boot.
Yeah, anyways.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it was last weekend or the weekend before last, I got calls on Saturday and on Sunday about bills that I had signed, that he had signed, that I had authored. Right? Sure. So I had a bill for...
That was a historic weekend.
Oh, it was.
I counted like 485 or so bills crazy. In a single weekend.
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't, so the governor's office leaving me voicemails like, hey, we signed, we had a big bill on veterans, allowing disabled veterans to use their property tax exemption earlier in the process when they're purchasing the home. Yeah. Strong bipartisan support for that bill, which was great. But he signed that over the week, a couple weekends ago. Yeah. And so it was pretty cool to get a call from them saying, hey, the governor liked your bill and decided to sign it. Right. I was 4 for 4 this year.
Good for
the
you.
ones I got to his desk. So he didn't veto any, which is nice.
Very nice. Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, it was crazy to I know they were working around the clock because I was getting calls on Sunday. So.
Of course, yeah. It's not an easy life, but
yeah, not for that month at least. Right. It's funny when the legislature is kind of going out of town. The governor's office is ramping up right for that whole month.
It's just like I don't envy the Department of Finance who spend the holidays prepping the Jan 10 budget.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a hard life. Yeah,
not super fun. I did escape for a very short couple days with my wife, which was nice. Good. I have to keep earning her vote because she's a constituent.
That's the most important vote.
So, but yeah, but back at it. The podcast was actually on a break, so want to definitely welcome everybody back. We were doing weekly through session, and now we're doing a little more sporadically. Going to have some special guests on later this year too. But
sounds fun.
Wanted to recap. We're going to get to this in a second on like the recap of what the governor's actions were, some of the big bills that he signed, and some of the ones that he vetoed. Want to dig into that. Before that, I wanted to ask you about a couple stories.
Okay.
Not major ones. Obviously, we had the Feinstein replacement and story since the podcast last met. So that was a big, really major thing in California. The governor has now appointed 2 senators.
Yes.
And
former state senator, former Secretary of State Alex Padilla is now the senior senator from California.
After just like a couple years in office.
Exactly.
Right?
So that, because they do use that terminology, senior senator, right? For one of the 2 and the junior senator, right? So Senator Butler is now the junior senator. But also, what a big deal that a governor ends up appointing not one, but both. Now, obviously, Senator Padilla has now been elected to his own full 6-year term.
Sure.
Sort of like the Attorney General and our Secretary of State got appointed, but then they won successful election themselves. But the same thing here. And of course, as you know, the big conversation today in political circles is whether Senator Butler will run or...
Is she going to run? What are you hearing?
Oh, gosh, I have no idea. But it was... The commentators, I thought, made some good points about her tour until COVID stopped her in her tracks. But making the rounds with a lot of certainly political players. So, and then again, Adam Schiff reported a record financial haul in his, and certainly,
and all those
Congresswoman Porter and Congresswoman Lee, and then yesterday we had a announcement from LA Fox newscaster.
I saw that,
running. And of course, on the Republican side, former Dodger Steve Garvey.
Steve Garvey, yeah.
So who knows what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be a crowded field.
Could be interesting, yeah.
It'll be interesting. But I mean, I think there's no doubt that historically, if you get appointed and you choose to run, pretty hard to beat.
There's a lot of incumbency factor. Of course, remember, Alex Padilla had been in office, LA City Council, including the president, the largest media market, state senator from LA. He had run successfully to be a statewide officer, Secretary of State. There's a little bit something different.
A little different
who knows?
Situation.
You never know.
Senator Butler,
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's really interesting. While we were off as well, PPIC released their Californians in their government survey. I don't know if you took a look at that one a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
But Californians named jobs, the economy, and inflation as their biggest issues, biggest issue facing the state. Second was homelessness, but really far second. I mean, it was like 14 points behind.
Yeah. The economy is number. Are we back to the economy stupid? I don't know.
I mean, the economy, right? I mean, people are feeling everything right now. I mean, we've got the gas prices.
I was going to say, look at the price of gas
going through the roof again,
close to $6 in lots of places.
Yeah. My colleagues and I called on a swifter transition to the winter blend that is cheaper for refiners to produce, hopefully bringing down the cost. And the governor actually did call for that a month early, which is good. But I mean, it's I think a very small dent.
Right. But I mean, we're still a good $2 a gallon more than the nationwide average.
Yeah.
So
I mean, and even the next closest state, I didn't look at the numbers this morning, but we were up close to $6, a gallon.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Absolutely. I've been in the Bay Area, Southern California, in the last 2 weeks. And so I've purchased gas in a number of places. Yeah. It's pretty high.
And I always like the job. I feel like it's such a big category too. Jobs, economy, and inflation. I mean, all three of those. I mean, it could be more the inflation than the jobs or who knows,
a lot of people combine housing and homelessness.
Right.
And,
yeah. It's hard to parse.
They can be very
out, right?
distinct, but they can also be super entwined. With
this one actually, they split those. So homelessness is second, and then third was housing costs.
Okay. Well.
And availability, which understandably.
But that can also lead to homelessness.
Those are the top three. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's
not entirely reflective of what the legislature worked on, but certainly.
Well, that is very true.
Well, I mean, housing and homelessness, I think a lot, but I don't know about jobs in the economy type stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say in my first year, I think the biggest legislative victory for our office was getting our audit of homelessness spending passed. And the auditor, we spoke with them recently, and they're going to be getting back to us in the next couple months here with that report. So just in time for the new session, hopefully, right?
I think the one thing that I have heard more than anything from family and friends is, where did all the money go? That we've spent on homelessness.
Yeah,
so
that's a great question.
I think the average Californian will be very interested in the state auditor's report in that regard, because that's really the question. And I said, I always have to say, that's not an area that I really work on. So I don't know where all the buckets went and how, but everyone, says it seems to have gotten worse, not any better. So
it certainly has.
It'll be interesting to see what
I
they
think in
show.
most communities for sure. So it will. I know that Californians care about that. I am hoping the legislature receives it as well as wow, we need to make some changes.
The reputation of our state auditor historically as well as today.
Yeah.
I mean, strictly nonpartisan and very well respected, that they do an excellent job and bring forth important recommendations. So I'd expect the legislature and governor to pay close attention to those audit results.
Yeah, it's they do great work, and they've been actually really communicating a lot with my office throughout the process, which I appreciate.
Interesting. I just assumed the auditor went out and did their thing and then came back to
they
you.
are. I'm not getting to call any of the shots, right?
But no, of course not. Of course not.
But they're keeping us in the loop. For example, when we passed it, there was 2 cities that were going to be audited. Okay. One was identified in the audit as San Jose, and the other one was up to the auditor. Oh. And so they did select, I believe, San Diego. So that'll be interesting to see the.
That's good. One north, one south.
Yeah. I was kind of hoping for Sacramento, but I advocated for that early on. But I think San Diego will be an interesting case study too. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we'll be interested. The last story on the topic of homelessness actually was San Francisco is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn the appellate ruling in the Boise case that is kind of tying the hands of a lot of jurisdictions in that.
What they can do with homeless encampments
on homeless encampments. So I just thought it was a huge deal to see a city of that size,
exactly,
and with the level of challenges they have with homelessness, finally say no, we got to fix this. So I'm interested to keeping up with that too. And
I'll be very curious to what the court says, because the locals. Well, and here in Sacramento, obviously the elected district attorney has sued the city council. Saying that they have not complied with the law, that this amounts to a public nuisance for businesses and for individuals in the Sacramento core, and that they're not doing their job. And, the city obviously has responded with, we're doing everything that we can. And so maybe their hands are tied to some degree, but we'll see what happens with this litigation.
It'll be interesting. I ran into our district attorney recently and was asking him about that, how that's going. Because, and it's a big deal.
Of course.
And obviously it's created some tensions locally. But this is kind of what accountability is all about, right? Is you gotta like actually dig into what's happening. And so I think from his perspective, he was telling me like, this is necessary for making sure the city's doing what they need to be doing. So.
Well, and to me, I wonder what the precedent that will be set one way or the other, depending on how the courts rule here. Because not only would it undoubtedly be applicable to other jurisdictions, but are there other things, I don't know, drug problems on the streets, prostitution, other things that, could local jurisdictions be on the hook for having, quote unquote, created a public nuisance for lack of enforcement in other areas of the law? They don't have the resources, or they've chosen not to prosecute, or whatever.
Whatever the reason.
Whatever the rationale is, just does it set a precedent for saying, hey, locals, you really have to abide by the letter of the law. We'll see what happens. It's going
to be really interesting. Well, let's dive into the bills.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If you're ready for that,
All
we've
right.
got the governor, as we were talking about, took a ton of actions. So let's start by just giving us like the numbers, a breakdown of the numbers. What were the numbers for this year in terms of like what made it to his desk and what got vetoed and all that stuff?
Well, the legislature is back up to sort of a normal number of intros. Usually it's higher in the first year,
Okay.
The odd numbered year, which we've just concluded or you've just concluded. Second, even numbered year, it usually goes down slightly.
Okay.
Looking over the last 12 or 14 years, what has surprised me is the utter consistency in those numbers. The odd numbers are roughly the same, give or take. The even numbers, roughly the same. It's fascinating in that regard. And obviously there's no one's sitting there saying, oh, last year you did 800, don't do more, do about the same. I mean, no one's over anyone's shoulder, but it's just interesting how almost year in, year out. Anyways, so, I always say about 23 to 2,500 bills get introduced for every single year. So 4,600 to 5,000 per 2-year session.
Yeah.
Obviously, the legislature works under bill limitations.
Sure.
But in terms of the governor's desk, 1,046. To put it in perspective, last year was 1,166.
Okay.
Now, I would note one thing: the lieutenant governor did sign a bill in 2021.
Okay.
She also signed at least one this year in the pro tem. You may recall.
I did remember seeing that
for the first time in many, many years. A pro tem. The last time was a while ago. I'm not remembering offhand, but it had been done before. But our pro tem, Tony Atkins, signed 2 bills. So technically that goes into the number.
And that is because the governor was out of the state and the lieutenant governor was out of the state at that time.
Yes. The California Constitution in Article 5 that deals with the executive branch, of course, lays out our constitutional officers, but it basically says that if the governor is disabled or out of state. Now, of course, today, maybe that made sense in 1879, from which the current Constitution comes. But, today with Zoom and email and electronic communication, you would think that the governor could sign bills, consult, issue executive orders, blah, blah, blah. But once he heads out of state, crosses the border to, meet with other governors in Oregon or Nevada, or he flies to Climate Week, in early September, whatever it may be. He is out of commission and it goes to the lieutenant governor. And of course, this summer, the lieutenant governor was out of the state as well at the same time. And then it goes through first to the pro tem, then to the speaker, and then to other constitutional officers.
Yeah.
And so Senator Atkins was third up. So she was acting governor, and she actually got to sign 2 bills. Anyway, so of the 1046, the governor signed 890.
Okay.
And he vetoed 156 for a veto rate of 14.9.
Yeah.
Of last year's 1,166, his veto rate was 14.5.
So pretty comparable.
His first year in office was almost the same as Jerry Brown's in his last year. Second set of terms, which was 16.5. So that's his high water mark.
Okay.
The lowest was in 2021, our second year of COVID, where it was 7.9. So that was a little abnormally low, but otherwise, even during COVID, when the legislature sent him only about 500 bills instead of the usual 1,000, 1,100.
Yeah.
He still had like a 13% or so veto rate. So kind of interesting in that regard. Yeah.
And you said, the number of bills that are introduced every year have stayed about the same. Yeah. Was there any change? I know the legislature a few years ago went from 40 per member to 50 per member.
The Assembly did.
Or that was just the Assembly, right?
The Senate kept it. It's interesting in the Assembly rule. You obviously have 50 for 2 years per 2-year session. That includes any constitutional amendment, but not resolutions. The Senate rule is 40 bills.
Okay.
It does not include resolutions or constitutional amendments, for what that's worth. Not that people introduce a bunch of constitutional amendments very often.
Sure.
But there is that slight distinction between the two houses. Not only does your house have a higher number than the Senate,
Right.
but and there's always a handful who reach that limit.
Yeah.
Not a large number, surprisingly. A lot of people get close to it, but not quite there. But there's always a handful of members in both houses who hit that limit. The other interesting thing in looking at the numbers, about 43 to 45% of every bill introduced year in and year out reached the governor's desk.
Wow.
That is a pretty high number.
That's very high.
So about 4 to 4.5 out of every 10 bills
Wow.
that's introduced reaches the governor's desk that year. And then with a roughly 85% success rate, a 15% veto, 41% of every bill introduced in the California legislature is signed into law.
Signed by the governor. Wow.
Now, just to put that in perspective, at the federal level, it's roughly 3 to 5% of introduced bills get enacted. So not only does California by far have the largest number of new laws, new statutes every year, by far.
Yeah.
800-900 every year. The next highest state is like 600-ish or something, and then it starts dropping precipitously.
Yeah.
But the percentage, I think, is really high.
That's incredible.
So you have a pretty strong chance of literally half of all the bills, just shy of half of all the bills that get introduced in our legislature get enacted into law.
Incredible.
That's a surprising percentage to me.
I have, I often bring up kind of the sheer volume of bills, when I speak to constituents and different groups throughout the community. And people are just astounded by the volume of bills and new laws really that California pumps out every year. Honestly, in my opinion, a bit unnecessarily in many cases. But
you remember Governor Jerry Brown in his first year of 2.0?
I don't remember
he made
this.
a statement, basically, it was somewhere he had signed like somewhere in the 700s. And he essentially publicly said, I don't think that there are 700 problems in California that need a new law.
Wow.
Of course, his 8th year, he signed, over 800. So he made the comment the first year, but, he was also a proponent of dealing well with the other branch, the co-equal branch of government and giving them their due. But I mean, first of all, I think, look, the legislature is the lawmaking branch of government. So certainly that should be its main charge. But it's not the only one. And I think oversight, even investigation, that doesn't mean that the legislative branch has to take head on the executive branch or be critical of the chief executive. It means, are our laws that we're passing being implemented the right way?
Yeah. Are
they being adequately funded? Do they need to be modified or anything?
Yeah.
So I would love to see more of that sort of work by the legislative branch. And the only way to do some of that work is to reduce the volume. And then the other thing is, for someone, as you know, who loves the process and loves the legislative word, the fact that there's literally no debate in committees.
Yep.
Our public testimony is basically 2 proponents and 2 opponents for 2 minutes apiece, which you really can't express much about a bill. You certainly can't delve into any details. You got to keep it at the proverbial, 35,000 foot level. And then the committee members, because they're dealing with just the sheer volume, really don't have the time or the ability to delve into the language. And, it was interesting that there were a couple of bills, primarily because I also worked on it. So I paid attention to bills, though, in particular, that the governor vetoed, pointing to the language or lack of definition or ambiguity in the language.
Yeah.
And respectfully, I don't criticize legislators and certainly not the staff for this.
Right.
I think it's just the volume that you're dealing with. Like, you don't have the time. The policy committees, even the ones that you sit on,
Yep.
When you've got 25 bills on the agenda, you can't go through it and say, to your colleague, now, why are we using this term instead of that term? Or, what's this new language mean? Or blah, blah, blah. There's not the time to do it. So,
and that's the key point, I think, is that, I think we're doing a little too much. I think we could be more effective if we did less. And actually, our new speaker, Robert Rivas, even kind of I guess, gave a nod to this idea in his swearing-in speech, where he said, not everything has to be a bill, right?
Exactly.
Which I actually appreciated, because I think he's absolutely right, and we've been saying it for a long time. I know it's certainly where I'm at, where there's so many other functions. The other thing we don't do, and you can probably speak to this a little bit too, is we give way too much power to unelected bureaucrats. When we pass bills and we basically say, hey, go write a bunch of regulations on this, but the legislature doesn't really direct, where that should go. And that's hugely problematic for different businesses in California. And
we
outsource it, right? We do. I mean,
look,
the details.
As you know, obviously the Constitution in Article 4 says the lawmaking power is vested in the legislature.
Right.
The executive branch and the administrative agencies, we have more than 200 of them that make laws, i.e. regulations, we call them. And while some of them have a degree of implicit authority, most of it is by statute, where you, the legislative branch, delegate some of your lawmaking authority to those folks.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. Too much is being delegated to them. But here's the other problem. And I know this is very wonky, that being the legislative geek that I am, I'm very concerned by the number of bills each and every year where the legislature exempts rulemaking from the APA process. Now, your listeners probably have no idea what I'm talking about, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet. Like federal law, the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, are basically the rules for those 200 plus lawmaking agencies and departments in the state, just like at the federal level. And when the legislature creates a statutory exemption, they say, hey, DMV, hey, Caltrans, hey, Cal EPA, you don't have to follow these rules. The two most important rules from my perspective under the APA, a third too. First is notice. The rulemaking body has to give notice to the general public and, of course, the regulated community. Yeah. Two, the opportunity to be heard. In other words, you can submit written comments or testify at their hearing. And third, creating a record for review, both by Office of Administrative Law and the courts ultimately, potentially. So when the legislature exempts them from the APA, it's like having no rules. Can you imagine if the legislature just announced, here are the new bills that we passed and sent to the governor? We didn't have to give notice to anybody.
Yeah.
We didn't have to have a hearing. We didn't have to take any written or verbal testimony. Right. We just did what we want and sent it along. That's what's being done. I find that to be terrible.
Oh, that's awful.
It's not only delegating your authority to the executive branch and those agencies, but you're saying, go ahead and do them and you don't have to follow the normal APA process. I find that a terrible precedent, and it continues unabated.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is. I think it's hugely problematic, and I think it's kind of a result of just, in some ways, just we're doing a little too much. So, but to that point, let's jump into the bills.
Okay.
I wanted to just raise a few of them here that we'll start with the ones that the governor signed. Again, you mentioned 800 something that he signed, so we're not going to go through all of them. Oh, I was going to get started at number one.
That's a multi-day podcast if you want to go through all 890. Yeah.
I mean, this is the hard part too, right? For the public, it's like, how do you possibly, this podcast is kind of, we're trying to highlight a few things here, but you can't possibly follow 890 bills. So, the first one on my list here is AB 1 was signed, which allows legislative staff to unionize.
Yeah. Not all staff, and it doesn't begin until January 1, 2026. So we'll see.
So we'll see, but it's and this one I think honestly doesn't have a huge impact on California as a whole, but I do think it's an interesting. It's a bill that's been attempted for many years,
Yes.
and the governor actually signed it this year. So it will be interesting to see how it impacts the legislative body.
Yeah.
Once it goes into effect. So
I mean, there are and of course, a lot of folks, your chief of staff, your legislative director,
yeah,
the committee consultants, they're not even part of it.
right.
So, there's a big exemption for those who are not included. Look, there's no one who has greater respect for the work that is done and the individuals who are the legislative branch staff members. No question, both the personal staff for individual legislators as well as committees. But, I always thought the easy way of doing this is make the provisions of the labor code applicable to the legislative branch of government. As you know, you're basically exempt from overtime and other things. Correct. Because you've exempted yourselves from most of the provisions of the labor code. I figured at least start there and see how that goes. Yeah. But obviously there were more people who said, let's form a union. So we'll see how it works.
Well, I just always got a kick out of, the legislature exempting themselves from all those rules. While putting them on other people. So, it's one of those fun things about the legislature. So big victory, I think for, I was a co-author of this bill, but SB 14.
Yeah, by Senator Grove.
Yep, by Senator Grove, which will make human trafficking of a minor a serious felony in California. Basically means it will bring it under the 3 strikes law in California. And again, some people listening may be like, how is that not a serious felony? Which I think is a great question.
Sure.
But Senator Grove worked very hard. And,
she did.
The amazing thing about this bill is something happened that I've never seen happen, at least maybe you have, but I haven't in the legislature, which is the Assembly Public Safety Committee changed its mind, voted down the bill initially after it got bipartisan support in the Senate. And then
actually got unanimous support.
Unanimous bipartisan support, exactly. And then took up the same bill unamended.
Right.
Again, like the next week. And
although I think at least 2 of the members, as I recall, continued to abstain. But
But and they got a lot of pressure, a lot of public pressure from the governor, pressure from the speaker.
Their new speaker, of course.
Which obviously
and the public.
The public pressure was huge.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. But it was amazing to see the Public Safety Committee that I've been very critical of for some of their stances, but were actually pressured to change their mind, which I was thankful to see. So
that would be a fascinating case study for like students to look at.
Yeah. Are you still teaching?
Oh, sure. Fall is teaching time.
You'll have to work it in somewhere.
Yeah, I'd have to work it in, but it is fascinating.
No, it really is. So, a couple other big bills involving really industries and employers. There was SB 1228.
AB 1228 by Holden.
I'm sorry, AB 1228 by Assemblymember
the new
Holden.
Fast Food Council and minimum wage of $20 next
an
April.
hour for fast food workers. Yeah. On a related topic, I'll just add SB 525 in there, which $25 minimum wage for healthcare workers. Yep. Both of these were major flexes, I think, by organized labor.
Yeah. In particular, SEIU. They did. They had a banner year this year, no question. Labor generally, SEIU in particular.
Well, and these bills were interesting too because they hit a lot of problems in the legislative process. I actually thought for a long time they weren't going to move forward, and then
I did too.
They struck these bargains at the end of session.
Yes.
Bargain's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. They struck these They negotiated amendments at the end of session that really, I was very surprised. Very surprised.
Well, on 525, it was interesting to me that part of your early budget action back in April, the legislature and governor did an early packet of money, $300 million or so, for hospitals that were at high risk of going under.
Yeah.
Particularly in rural areas. So a lifeline. And then at the same time, they were considering raising the pay for healthcare workers to $25 an hour, where the Hospital Association was saying, holy cow, we can't bear
these don't
that.
fit. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that was interesting. Listen, another one for a case study is 1228, because you can't think or talk about 1228 without last year.
Right.
AB 257 by Assemblyman Holden goes through. The governor signs it to much fanfare. The franchise industry comes in within the required 90 days, gets the required number of signatures, referendum qualifies, places the law on hold. Assemblyman Holden comes back in January of 1228 and says, well, I know the legislature took out joint liability for franchisees and franchisors. I'm going to put it back in. Then, to make it even more interesting, the legislature places in a budget bill junior $3 million for the Industrial Welfare Commission to rejuvenate. It's been dead in the water for 19 years. We're going to put money in and say your job over the next year is to do wage orders, including minimum wages for the sectors of the economy, particularly hard hit with lower income individuals like fast food. You have to have it done by October 31st of 2024, which would be before the referendum. And then that gets dropped, the referendum gets removed, and they strike a deal.
Incredible.
I mean, that's, and don't forget, Assemblyman Isaac Bryan, our majority leader, had to do a bill with an urgency because while proponents since the Steinberg bill, like 2014 or so, have had the authority to withdraw a qualified initiative before the Secretary of State places on the ballot, it didn't apply to a referendum. So we had to change the law, expand the law to allow it to apply to a referendum as well, so that the proponents of the referendum could withdraw it. I mean,
unbelievable.
That is, it pulled in direct democracy and the ballot and the budget and bills. I mean, that literally touched on like every part of the process. It was fascinating. Yeah.
That's really incredible.
Yeah.
And, in the end, they passed the bill.
Exactly.
Now they did strip out some of the, I think, more problematic provisions of it.
Yep.
But I mean, I'm hearing from local franchisees, and they're like, "This is still going to really hurt us."
Oh, no question. Well, look, and I think ultimately, it doesn't matter what side you're on, for good or for bad. But yes, you're going to pay more for healthcare, and you're going to pay more at fast food.
Yeah. Well, and the healthcare one is a big deal because healthcare costs, are already going up every year.
Of course.
People's, share and percentage of healthcare in out of their paycheck is going up every year.
Oh yeah.
I just got that call last week. Right. Here's your premiums for next year. Right. It's a huge problem.
My small firm is in the small group market, and we pay a lot of money.
Yeah. And this is healthcare costs will go up. I think in some ways access could go down.
Yeah.
Particularly if, you mentioned Madera's hospital that we lost.
Yeah.
If we lose some more hospitals, this could have a real profound impact on access, particularly in more rural communities.
Absolutely. No question.
Everything that I'm saying is it's going to be really challenging. For consumers and for the healthcare system.
No question.
On the topic of healthcare, there was also this SB 770 by Senator Wiener to require basically asking the federal government if California can transition to
on the path to single payer or not.
Healthcare, which, again, continues to be a conversation. We have defeated that effort multiple occasions. This is kind of just another bite at that apple, but
trying to incrementally move there. But I don't know if we ever get there with the costs associated with it and the federal government approvals and everything else needed. Yeah, we'll see.
We all of the problems we have in California and the governor, but we have banned Skittles. So that's another bill here.
No, that's a misnomer, Skinner. Did you read his?
Oh, that's right.
His signing message.
I should pull it up.
Because I don't know how many people caught it, but in like the second or third paragraph,
what did it say?
He mentions that he has delivered along with this message a bag of Skittles.
Did it really? So AB.
So apparently the governor's office took the signing message along with the signed bill back to the assembly clerk's office and said, we have signed the bill. Here's the chapter number. Here's a signing message. And oh, by the way, here's a pack of Skittles, which are not prohibited. The governor noted.
Okay. All right. So for those that aren't aware, and that was kind of the media headline, right? But AB 418 is a bill that prohibits the making, selling, delivering, distributing, holding, offering for sale a food product that contains a number of different
like red dye 4
chemicals,
and all that,
like red dye 3 and some other things. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously the Skittles thing kind of caught the media's attention.
Of course.
You're right. Here it is. So I have there have been many misconceptions about this bill and its impacts. For example, attached to this message is a bag of the popular candy Skittles, which became the face of this proposal.
I thought that was clever.
So he says the bag of Skittles that he included were from the European Union.
Yes.
So I think the point, and this was kind of the author's
EU
point
already bans
throughout the process, is that we still have Skittles in the European Union. Right. So that's kind of,
they have to modify the ingredients.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I mean, if there's a Skittle shortage or something, I mean, it's. I know.
Well, my favorite's Butterfinger. I don't know if it's got any banned things in it. We'll see. I don't know. Yeah, I'll have to check the back of the.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Last couple here on the signed list. I mean, the governor did sign AB 701, which kind of tries to get at penalty enhancements for fentanyl.
Yep.
But it only applies to really, really massive quantities of fentanyl.
My understanding is it's the same as heroin and something else, but
it's
we couldn't enhance the penalties, above and beyond that for fentanyl.
Right. Yeah. So, I think this was one of the failures of the legislature this year. Is I think there was a lot of lack of action on fentanyl. I think this was one of the few bills that made it, but there were a lot of others that including a bill I co-authored. AB 19 that would have required Narcan in schools.
Oh, right.
That was killed at the very end of the process. Really unnecessary, I think, bill to kill. I mean, that was a really easy one for the legislature and the governor, and ended up getting killed. Something that a lot of school districts are already doing. And so
what
frustrating.
About other public facilities, whether it's bars and restaurants to sports facilities and public transit and other places.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And there were other bills that would have attempted or would have increased penalties even more that were killed as well. That I think we got to get at the actual dealers too. But more to come on that next year, hopefully. I know we've got some things planned. And then the last one on this list is he signed SB 2, which was the big firearms bill.
Yeah.
That really, again, my political commentary, but, my caucus tried a few times to bring back gun enhancements, right? So if you commit a crime with a gun, you can get charged with additional penalties, right? Additional time served. Instead, we do this bill that, goes after CCW holders that tend to be law-abiding citizens.
Query if it survives the court challenge, which was obviously
and
filed
that is
immediately.
The next step, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you read the bill, there's a lot of in section 1 of the bill, there's lots of legislative findings and declarations trying to lay out how that bill's language, which follows the findings and declarations, complies with the U.S. Supreme Court decisions and why it is constitutional under the Second Amendment. So we'll see whether or not it survives federal court challenge or not.
Yeah, the court's definitely the next step for this one. I expect a challenge.
No question.
We'll keep an eye on that. But those were some of the big ones signed. I don't know if there's any others I didn't mention that.
Well, certainly the GHG disclosure bills. Now, granted, it's 5,200 or so of the largest corporations in the state, but
explain that bill real quick.
Well, it's a first in the nation where they will have to disclose not only theirs, but also like subcontractors and others on their greenhouse gas emissions.
Large companies.
Companies, yeah. So that's where the CARB is estimated the largest 5,200 44 or something. I forget the exact number. Largest corporations will be subject to it. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission at the federal level, has been looking at a similar one that might
Interesting.
Be a more national-based one, which probably makes more sense
it seems
than having an
really
individual
hard to do
disclosure.
state by state.
But so we'll see how that pans out. The California Trucking Association earlier this week or last week filed a lawsuit challenging that.
Okay.
So we'll see if it survives.
Yeah.
But that's another, first in the nation bill from the state of California. So.
Well, and some of the folks I've talked to that are going to have to deal with this, right? Just the sheer complexity of it.
Yeah.
Especially
for
with
those
the
small
subcontractors,
exactly.
right? It's like, you've got your employees here, but then you contract with a company that is doing this level of driving. It's like, how do you...
Well, and it's interesting because the governor did another one of these signing messages on that bill and noted the potential impact on smaller and mid-sized businesses and for his, agencies to keep a close eye on that. And we may have to, modify the language. So we'll see what happens.
Kept the door open for that. All right. So. Well, let's move on to the bills that he vetoed.
Okay.
Again, vetoed quite a few. I was just going to mention a couple here, but SB 99, major bill. This would have provided unemployment insurance benefits for striking workers.
Yeah, 799.
What did I say? 899?
No, it's okay.
SB 799.
Yeah.
Unemployment insurance benefits for striking workers. This came along at the end of session. There was a big strike, I think the writer's strike and a number of other things, right, that were contributing to the conversation here. Yep. I kind of expected him to veto this, and he did, which I think was the right decision.
Much to the dismay of the main sponsor, the California Labor Federation.
Of course.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people did expect it. Look, when the legislature tried a similar bill in 2019. That was, first of all, that was after 4 weeks of striking. This version was only after 2.
Yeah.
The other thing is this was pre-COVID. In 2019, our unemployment insurance fund had a roughly $3 billion surplus.
Yeah. A little different today.
We owe the federal government about $18 billion. And while the state is legally responsible for the interest, $200 to $300 million a year, the principal, the $18 billion, is paid back by employers alone, not employees, only employers.
Employers in the form of payroll taxes, correct?
Yeah, basically it's a reduction in the amount of the FUTA credit at the federal unemployment tax credit is reduced until that amount is paid off, which is estimated at anywhere a low from 8 to a high of 10 to 12 years. So
that's a long time.
It's a long time and a lot of money. It goes up every year until it's paid off.
Yeah.
And it's on a per employee basis.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 5 or 5,000 employees. It's a per head charge for every employee. Yeah.
And it is in practice, it is a tax increase on businesses.
Of course. They're the only ones that play it. This is not like a joint employer-employee contribution or something. Yeah.
So, I think that it's frustrating because there's a lot of reasons our unemployment insurance fund is in trouble. But, obviously COVID and the pandemic, there was a lot of interesting policy decisions. There was also a lot of fraud in that system. But the reality is that I think it was California Chamber of Commerce was advocating when we had a budget surplus, hey, let's help save some of our businesses from paying this off and pay $10 billion of it down, through the state.
Well, last year's budget, not from June of 2023, but June of 2022, the legislature and governor agreed to make a $1 billion reduction, a payment to the federal government, not much, but something, but also provide $500 million worth of tax credits for small businesses to help offset that first year. And then this year's budget that was proposed by the governor in January and ultimately adopted removed both of those items. Yep. So the vast majority of other states who also owed the federal government because they had to, they didn't have enough money in their UI fund due to COVID, Most of the other states paid it back by using federal stimulus dollars. We obviously use those for other purposes.
We did not. Correct.
And, so the employer community is stuck with paying it off, unfortunately.
Yeah. It is really unfortunate. Yeah. And it'll have an impact on consumers too, I think.
Well, it's just like a minimum wage increase.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, to some degree, it's going to be passed along to the consumer, and therefore you and I will pay a higher cost for all these things. Sure.
AB 316, Aguiar Curry, another big bill this year on autonomous trucks.
Yes.
The
a
governor
human must be in the cab.
Yeah, human must be in the cab.
Yeah.
Even when the autonomous technology is ready.
Yeah. Another big labor priority. I mean, honestly, I wasn't surprised. I know some press folks had asked, what's your prediction? I said, well, the head of GoBiz, D.D. Myers, sent a very strong opposed letter that I would think that the governor's probably going to follow.
I think so, too.
And he did. This was one of the early vetoes.
Yep. Yeah, that was my expectation as well, that he would veto that.
Well, this is one of those, he has not abandoned labor in any such way. I mean, he signed the vast majority of their stuff, but in a few instances, he recognized the situation with the UI fund and its deficit.
Right.
On the autonomous truck thing, I think he recognized that it's the ongoing tension between, technology and the human aspect of it. I think with artificial intelligence and AI, how do we strike the right balance there? We don't want to see all jobs go away, like the Hollywood strikers. That was one of their key issues, right? But we also have to allow some of this technology to develop and not shut it down, especially in a state, because not only is California the 5th largest economy competing with the other states, but we're competing internationally, especially when it comes to technology and also.
Yeah, I think he was partially worried it was going to have a chilling effect on the development of that technology.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep. You got it.
And honestly, it's interesting too, because I had talked with the proponents of this bill. I did not support this bill.
Okay.
I was probably one of the few that didn't actually, but
it did have strong bipartisan support.
It did, but I was not on board with that. But I went to the proponents because we had some great conversations, and I said, why don't you put a sunset date in there? My concern with the bill is that it was in perpetuity. It was just permanent. It was forever until we decide otherwise. And I wasn't comfortable with that. I really felt like, look, this is a very it's a very new frontier, right? And putting permanent policy on top of that versus
we have to
a
be more
5-10-year sunset date where the legislature would need to revisit this conversation when the technology is a little more developed. I thought that made more sense from a policy
I like that
perspective.
proposal.
And I think, they weren't willing to do that. We'll see if it comes back next year with a sunset date. I don't know.
You never know.
But there was a number of legislators that were asking for that.
Okay.
Right? And,
interesting.
And I think, I think that would have made a lot of sense. But it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Definitely.
In the next session. And then let's see here. I guess last one I just wanted to mention, because it was I felt like a really big public safety bill, was SB 81, which would have developed a formal process for the Board of Parole hearings to, it basically would have kind of created the expectation that you're let out when you're eligible for parole unless you meet certain criteria.
Okay.
And this one was one we raised a lot of flags on in our caucus of, this isn't really how it's supposed to work, right? The Board of Parole hearings needs to take it case by case.
Yeah.
And make sure that the people that aren't rehabilitated stay,
continue with their efforts. Yes.
Right. So, exactly. So, was happy to see the governor sign that one.
Veto.
Veto that one.
Yeah.
See, this is why I need a co-host.
There you go. This has been fun. Thank you.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, those are definitely some of the bills of interest, and I appreciate you talking through some of those. I think people are going to find that there's much more material out there that we didn't talk about on the show.
Definitely, yeah.
So I know there's probably people right now. What about this bill? What about this bill? I was like,
I know. How could you
like
choose?
you said, we could have been here for a few days probably. Yeah. But any final thoughts before we wrap up?
always looking forward to the next year and what 2024 brings. Obviously, an election year.
Yeah, and that changes the legislative process too in some ways, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And obviously, we have a March 5th primary instead of the usual June.
Right.
And
that's only in presidential years.
Exactly,
right?
every 4 years. But, your constituents, I'm one of them in the Sacramento area, are obviously going to be voting on their candidates of choice. And then you have to wait all the way until November. If you thought it was a long wait from June to November, just wait until it's March. And then you're like...
Well, it's funny, because I've been talking with local candidates and stuff, and it's like, it's like really close. This is like 5 months away.
Right. There's maybe another 6 weeks is the deadline to submit your name.
Right.
But, if you're not running for a lot of these offices by now, I don't know that you can gear up in just 3 months or so.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting year. So
and never dull in the legislature.
Never dull moment. Exactly. Just a couple quick announcements. So we're working on bringing on some special guests for a couple more episodes before January, and then we'll probably go back to our weekly format. And if you have any ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. You can listen and follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter or X, but I still have it in here as Twitter.
Do too.
So, and then you can follow me on Twitter at Joshua_Hoover, and then Chris at Chris Micheli. Micheli is Micheli. Chris has some great content on Twitter, so definitely give him a follow. It's good. Good
Thank
stuff.
you, sir.
But hey, thanks for coming on
Thanks
again.
I really
appreciate it.
Always enjoy the time.
And we'll hopefully see you again.
Look forward to it. Thank you, sir.